So maybe that's the strategy. You got to come off as too cool, and then people will just be drawn to you.
Well, they were almost intimidated by it,
okay.
And so I ended up doing the opposite in Chicago, and I came across as like extremely earnest and uncool, and I gathered a lot of people around me, and that turns out to be the way that I really enjoy making friends.
Okay, so that's the strategy.
Yeah, at least that's what I tried next. Yes.
Welcome back, and I'm here with Neeloy for our next interview on Adulting 101. Neeloy and I met actually through an organization called Tea with Strangers. Not actually sure if it's still around, but it was all about meeting people and strangers really in a coffee shop and getting to know each other. And it just goes to show that people who are today strangers can one day end up being your best friend. So I'm excited to talk to Neeloy about his experiences kind of moving around in different places. He grew up in London in the UK, then also went to school in Cambridge, and then made his way to the US, where he lived in San Francisco, Chicago, and is soon moving to New York. So it's a very timely conversation. So Neeloy, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Sammy. This is fun.
Yeah. So I want to start hearing from just what it was like for you making friends growing up.
Yeah. So first of all, it was not something I really thought about. Like, it wasn't a conscious decision to make friends. I think growing up, you just start playing with people,
right.
and then you get older and you're still playing with them, and the play changes a bit, but suddenly you're 15, like kicking a soccer ball around. And growing up, I went to school, I had friends at school, my parents were pretty social and encouraged us to make friends with their friends' kids. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't ever something I thought about consciously, and I really only started thinking about it when I went to university for the first time, and I thought, the whole new group of people, what am I going to do? Mm-hmm. Who am I going to be? Everyone gets to reinvent themselves a bit.
Right.
I don't think I reinvented myself that much more at grad school. Mm. So it wasn't something I thought about for a while until I was forced to make the change.
Right.
I went to the same school from the age of 7 to 18, and so I had the same school friends all the way through.
Oh, wow.
It's funny, the things that start out subconscious that then get brought to your consciousness.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Like when you have to put in an effort to actually go out of your way to make friends versus, especially in school, you're surrounded with opportunities to make friends, and right. That makes sense.
That's right. And especially at school, I was surrounded by kids who were very similar to me. Mm-hmm. And so it was just, also when you're 9 years old, how many different things are there about your character versus your friends? Everyone wants to just play video games and play sports.
Yeah.
So it was pretty easy to make friends without trying.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you said things kind of changed a little bit when you went to grad school.
Yes.
So can you talk more about what was different?
Yeah. So the first big thing was I was in a different country, and you grow up in a certain culture, and even though that country was very similar to the US, the UK is still different enough that I was aware of going in. Like, I remember my first few days in the US, I felt like I was in a movie, because all the movies I'd ever seen were American movies.
Right.
And it was so surreal to sit in lecture halls being lectured by American professors with American students all around. Mm-hmm.
And if I can just interrupt, what made you decide to even make that move?
Good question. I in a way, I fell into it. So I was doing my undergraduate degree. In the UK, you specialize very early. Mm-hmm. And I'd specialized in science. And halfway through that, I realized I should have done math in the first place. That was the thing I really enjoyed doing. And I realized there were careers in it, but a little bit too late. So I was applying to grad school for kind of math programs. And got into 2 places, one in the UK, one in the US. And my whole network was in the UK. No one talks about leaving for the US in the UK. It's not really a done thing. I have friends in India, China, Iran, who were like, their desire is to get to the US. And so all the kids are working to get to the US. That's not the case in the UK. So none of my friends have moved here, for example. So I wasn't really thinking about it that strongly until, so I had these two offers and I was leaning towards the UK when it was cheaper, it was closer to home, I knew it was much more of the more transparent option. Until we had a family event, 40 of my family members in a room, and my brother decides to go around and poll each of them, and he asked each of them, like, should Neeloy go to the US or stay in the UK? And he went round, and by the end of the evening, he showed me the tally of results. And of the 40 people that were there, 39 of them said I should go to the US.
Oh, wow.
And one said I should stay in the UK. And it was my grandma who was like, the UK is cheaper, you should stay in the UK. Everyone else was saying...
practical decision.
That's right. Everyone else said you have to go to the US. Like, you can always come back. Which ended up being a running theme of decisions I'd made later on. You can always come back. So I took it. At the very least, it made me think, I'm clearly... When I'm thinking about whether I should go or not, I'm clearly missing a big piece because to me it's very close, but to everyone else in this room it's crystal clear.
Right.
So I then came to the US
leap.
and then stayed.
Yeah. Wow. It's interesting how even just how family can see things differently. Because sometimes you're so close to the problem and they're like, no, do it. And especially being so young, I imagine, like, when else do you have the opportunity to go and move to a new place?
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
2 or 3 of them in particular took me aside and they said, look, Neeloy, if I had the chance to go to the US when I was your age, I would have killed for that chance. And I had I hadn't thought very much about this and I was just going along with it all.
Right.
And that made me think, like, oh wow, this is a cool, interesting opportunity.
Yeah.
So
being in a new country, in a new place, feeling like you're in a movie, what was it like building that new support system away from home?
This is a good question. So the first things I did were I threw myself into the various clubs and societies that were on campus. So one thing I regretted not doing at my undergraduate was going to India Society. So I sort of pushed away from my Indian roots, and so I decided to go to an India Society event and met a bunch of people there who became my friends. My graduate program had events I went to, and so there were a few like ready-made communities there that I tapped into. Probably the big thing that I kind of consciously chose to do was in my undergraduate days, I felt like I was the one who was putting in a lot of effort to get people together, to be friendly, to make friends. So at grad school, I told myself, let me be like half a step more aloof. Let me see if other people will come to me to make friends. Certainly, I made friends at grad school, but I was actually much lonelier as a consequence. And that was an experiment I ran that I learned a lot from, let's just say. And I ended up coming to Chicago a couple of years later and thinking, I don't want to do that again. I'm going to be extremely earnest, extremely keen, and just put a lot of effort into making friends. So that was an interesting experience for me. In terms of the support network, I got lucky in that I didn't need too much support generally. Like I was young and healthy and was going to a university. I kind of immigrated in the easiest way possible, I think. That you show up, there's a huge support network already for you. There are tons of international students on campus. There's a lot of, there was a building on campus that was for international students, right? So if ever you're like lonely or something, you can go there. At the same time, lots of the international students who didn't speak English as a first language, but I did, and so interacting with the local Americans was even easier for me. So I ended up making friends in my grad program in India Society. I played some sports, made friends through there. But I definitely consider the time in grad school kind of the most lonely period of my life, interestingly.
That's interesting. Because I wonder, like you said, you were doing this experiment, which is very like math science-y, like thinking, which is interesting. And I know we've talked about doing social experiments just in general, right? Like having the opportunity to like, I wonder what will happen with this. But it just goes to show how that curiosity with how you approach making friends or making connections or being in a new place could have also opened you up to all the new opportunities that you had in front of you. Yeah.
The final thing I'll say about that is that I found out later that my semi-aloofness came off as quite cool. And in fact, people expressed to me later that, and people who I've subsequently become friends with, more closely friends with, said, we always thought you were busy, and that's why we didn't it seemed like you had so many friends. We always thought you were busy, so we didn't think to reach out. And so that was interesting.
So maybe that's the strategy. You got to come off as too cool, and then people will just be drawn to you.
Well, they were almost intimidated by it. Okay. And so I ended up doing the opposite in Chicago, and I came across as extremely earnest and uncool, and I gathered a lot of people around me, and that turns out to be the way that I really enjoyed making friends.
Okay, so that's the strategy.
Yeah, at least that's what I tried next. Yes.
And do you feel, I mean, just kind of going from that transition from San Francisco to Chicago, what do you feel was maybe some of the similarities or differences with what it was like for you to transition to a new place?
Yeah. So in both cases, I didn't know anyone at the new place I was going to, which was a little scary, but mostly exciting. This time around, I wanted to be much less aloof. I wanted to get stuck into Chicago. In my head, I knew Chicago was an improv scene, and so in my head, I was thinking, I'd begun to do a little bit of improv at the end of grad school. But then I got to Chicago, and I met a couple people through Tea with Strangers early on. Like in my first couple of weeks, I went to two teas. I made a couple friends there, and then over the next few months, I started to meet their friends, and I would be extremely upfront and open that I was looking to make friends. I was new in the area. I was looking to make friends, I think I just managed to meet a lot of people who were in their early to mid 20s, who were doing the same thing, who were also new to Chicago and who were interested kind of in improv and mentioned something about that. Furthermore, when I first joined my new job in Chicago, I actually didn't make a ton of friends in that new job, and I thought to myself, this is bad. Like that's the one ready-made community for me. So didn't manage to make a ton of close friends there, and so I was really looking into the city itself for new things. So I talked to a lot of people about, and improv seemed to be a thing that came up over and over again. I'd done some improv before, and I thought to myself, let me host an improv class and let's see how it goes. And 11 people came to the first one. They seemed to have a good time. And then from then on, we can talk about that a little bit. People just kept coming to this thing that I hosted.
Right. Improv with strangers.
Improv with strangers, yeah. With doffing my cap to the Tea with Strangers, which is where I made my first friends. And in fact, the Tea with Strangers community ended up being sort of the early community that came to Improv with Strangers.
And I remember those nights, and whenever we would get together, and it was a lot of fun to use something like improv that lowers your defenses, because everyone's making a fool of themselves, and it's just yes-anding everything. Okay, you just roll with what you've got, which is pretty cool that you were able to, in college, you already have those communities that are built that you just kind of have to show up. But from what you're telling me, it's pretty cool that you had the wherewithal and initiative to say, okay, well, I'm going to just build it for myself.
Yeah. And
from the ground up.
I got lucky that it worked, because I've actually tried to restart it a couple times since then, and it hasn't worked. So something about the early people who were there and the early energy of the room made it really turn into a self-sustaining group. And I think you're right that it lowers people's defenses. And when I used to think about it, to me it was like getting drunk with friends, but without any of the kind of side effects or hangovers from alcohol. Everyone was being silly and being jokey, and their inhibitions were lowered. And so we would do improv from 2 till 4 on a Saturday, and then from 4 onwards we would just hang out in a loopy state of mind, which is always fun.
Yeah. And it almost, even for myself, having gone to these events, it's like it was one of those things that was contagious. You wanted to bring a friend with you the next time. And we really did have this community of people who were genuinely wanted to just connect with one another. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. I don't think I have anything else to say.
No, I just, kudos. I just wanted to give you kudos that's, and one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you about it.
One thing I noticed about that was, doing improv is a very, for some people it's what's the word? It's very intimidating. I have plenty of close friends who said they would never come to an improv session, and they never did. because it was just terrifying for them. That actually got me thinking about people clearly want repeated low commitment activities to do together with people, right, to build a community. Improv was a great way of like a very upfront filter of you have to be willing to like put yourself out there in a silly, vulnerable way. The next thing I tried after that was open house, where we said, you know, let's lower the barrier even more, and all you have to do is just come to our room and sit around. And so every Thursday evening we would host people with absolutely no agenda. There was the stakes were very low. We said come around from 8 till 10 every day, every week. We will have some drinks. We can order food if we want, but we don't have to. And that was another event. That was another kind of type of event where people were interested in bringing their friends along. So they were like, yeah, let's get to know each other, but we don't have to just get to know each other one-on-one. We can get to know each other while sitting in a group of people. Right. Which I think people, yeah, I ended up realizing that there's a big need. People, my kind of rule to myself is people are more lonely than you think. And repeated interactions between people, especially in kind of anonymous big cities like this, really kind of help ground you. Yeah, and it's not because when I think about events like that where you go and you may not know everyone there, it's more for networking and there's some sort of career component and it's high stakes and it just feels maybe not as genuine. And a big difference here was that people were encouraged to kind of be themselves, and it doesn't matter if you were working in the business sector or lived in the Gold Coast or in the suburbs or were in education like me or anything. I think that was pretty unique that you found people from all different kinds of careers and walks of life who were just there to have a good time. The group was great. The vibes were great. Yeah. So I know that, so now at this point in your kind of life story for kind of tracking it, you've gone from London, Cambridge, San Francisco, Chicago, and part of it could have been like looking for a different job opportunity or education advancement. What kind of made you realize, and maybe this is more for like Chicago to New York, that it was time to move on? Like, what were some of the factors you took into consideration when making that decision? Yeah, good question. One way I thought about it was I wanted to look back on my life, and if you have lots of experiences, the perception of your life is longer. Like, we don't really remember when we sat down watching TV one evening. I do that many evenings, but I don't really remember all those evenings as distinct evenings. But you do remember that one time you did something special with your friends, or you went to a new place, and so on. And to me, New York is the kind of extreme version of that, and it's really kicking myself into forcing myself to have new experiences. There is nothing that I don't like about Chicago. I love Chicago, and will be sad to leave. And at the same time, I know it'll be here for me if I want to come back. And so this is me. I kind of hear my 80-year-old self yelling back through time, like, Neeloy, go do some different things. It's been 7 years in Chicago. You have the ability to go live in New York. You don't have any responsibilities right now. Your job makes it easy for you to do that. Take it. If you hate it, come back. That's fine. If you love it more than Chicago, then great. You found something even better. But at the very least, it'll be different, and it'll be a new experience. And you'll look back on your life and think, well, I remember that as a distinct period in my life. So I've been in Chicago 7 years, and I moved 5 times, and even that has been helpful. Having different rooms as my backdrop of my life for different years has been a way of looking back and thinking, oh, this didn't all blur into one. There were actual distinct time periods. Right. So to me, this is one level higher, a version of that. Yeah. There are other reasons too, right? New York, it's got opportunities that Chicago doesn't have. It's a little bit more international. It's closer to home. Very few of my friends can visit in Chicago, but I suspect they've all been telling me they're going to visit in New York. So that there are other reasons too, but probably the highest level reason is let's try something new, and if you can, if it doesn't cost too much in various different ways, right? You can always come back if you don't like it, then give it a go. Yeah. And like you said, you're in a moment in your life where you don't have a lot of other responsibilities
that are necessarily tying you to Chicago or a specific place.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So let's go try somewhere new.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I've been here for 7 years, and I've seen friends come and go. You were one of them, right? You were there when I arrived, and then you spent some time in Colombia, and you came back. Other friends weren't here when I arrived, and then came here later than me, and are still here, or came here and then have left. This is what everyone seems to be doing.
Right.
It's my turn.
Yeah. Yeah, and we will definitely visit you in New York,
Good,
when
you make that move.
Hi, so just a tiny break between the video because there was a siren going past and really didn't want to have that dominating the conversation. But if you're liking this video, you can click like and give some love to our lovely interviewers and interviewee, Sammy and Neeloy. Okay, I'm gonna go back behind the camera now and disappear forever. Maybe I'll like transition that out back to you guys like all stealthily.
Okay.
But most likely I won't do that. I'll just leave all of this in. Okay. All right. Yeah. So if you like this video, tell your friends. If you dislike it, leave a comment below and tell people why you dislike it. But make sure they come and watch it. Okay. I'll stop being corny.
Yeah, I admire your optimism when it comes to moving to a new place and kind of embracing it, and ultimately what it's going to mean for the big picture of your life, that you'll have all these different moments that you can look back to. Like, oh, when I was in my early 20s, I was in, San Francisco, and then mid to late 20s, Chicago, and then 30s, New York, and then who knows where else you're going to be in your life. And I wonder if anything comes up for you, if any nostalgia comes up for you as you, even now, think back to any of those chapters of your life.
Yeah, the big one is London. So my family are all there. And I missed a lot. Like, in particular, I remember missing my granddad's 80th birthday. And like all the family had flown in, and I forget why. It was just too many trips to London or something, couldn't find time. And I saw the videos of it, and like honestly, seeing the videos made it even worse, because then it made it very real how it kind of made real to me the experience. So, and I heard lots of family friends in London. What I've been doing the last couple of years is just partly because COVID has made it easy to work remotely, is just being in London a lot, which is not a sustainable solution, because it means you start to split your life. Like, I've spent of the last 2 years, the last 24 months, maybe I spent 5 months in London. That also means that's 5 months I haven't spent in Chicago with my community here. And it's not something, it doesn't scale very well. Like, if I go to New York, I can't also spend 5 months every year in Chicago just to like go to the events that I would have otherwise missed. That's what I have done so far, especially for London family. For weddings especially, I try and get back for the big events. But you do just lose things. And I don't keep in touch particularly well with people. It's something I'm working on. But you trust that the things that you lose, you trust that over time, like the things that are really important stick with you. I've still got friends who I'm very close to from every part of life. And those friends aren't necessarily ones I'm talking to every day, but they are whenever I go back anywhere. They're the people who I'm immediately messaging or giving as much warning as I can.
Yeah.
So they help in some sense. Maybe this is cynical. Like, they help denoise your past, because you look back and say, well, actually, the people who I really missed with, these people, and it turns out the other people I was spending time with, that's a little negative. But the other people I was spending time with, like, I don't miss them as much as I thought I would. So you definitely miss people. Certainly, it's the people more than anything else. Like, it's nice having a beach in Chicago. It's really nice having a beach in Chicago and walking to work and stuff. But that's not what makes it. That's not what kept me here. It was the people.
Right.
So you just leave a piece of yourself behind everywhere, right? And then the piece of yourself is the shared experiences that you have with those friends in Chicago.
Yeah.
Right, like our early conversations, I'm not going to be able to have with someone new, because I'm not in that state anymore, and I'm not in that state of life and state of mind and so on. So I go to New York, and there will be no Sammy in New York, and there is in fact no chance for there to be a Sammy equivalent in New York, because Neeloy won't be like that again. But there'll be hopefully someone different and someone new,
Right.
And maybe there's new room going forwards.
Yeah, and it's almost like this tension between what is exciting and what could be new, could be better, and holding on to the parts that and people who made each move or each chapter of your life meaningful, and kind of holding on to those relationships. And definitely can resonate with having family abroad. With me having been born in Mexico and having family there, it is hard to miss being there for milestones in even like my niece's lives and things like that. Yeah. So I appreciate you being honest about, like there are difficult parts to having moved around or splitting your life into these different, parts. Luckily, like you said, you've been able to work from home and can have flexibility to work out of London, which makes it easier to sustain maybe those relationships. But it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, over the last couple of years at least, I've managed to spend more time with my parents than the previous, 5 or 6 because of work from home. So I've been very lucky to be able to do that.
Right. Well, we're getting into the end here of our conversation. And so as we look forward towards your move to New York, how are you approaching this transition?
It's a great question. And, as much as I talked about the excitement of moving to a new place, most of my energy over the next few months will be sunk into saying goodbye to Chicago properly. I was as I said, lots of friends have since left Chicago. Some of them have left very quietly. Some of them have left with a big party. One of my friends, he left Chicago, and in the weeks leading up to his leaving, he went on walks with lots of his different friends, and he just summarized. We would go on a walk together, and he would talk about all the experiences we'd had together. And at the end of the walk, he gave me a handwritten note that sort of did the same thing. And so clearly he'd spent some time thinking about what each of his friendships had meant to him, and just sort of expressing it in a letter. And it was lovely, and I think it's so good I just want to copy it. And I think, spending some time thinking about all the people who are important, and writing down why they're important to you, is just a good way of it's, closing the chapter is maybe the wrong phrase, but something like that.
Yeah.
Just having some closure on the Chicago experience. And I'm excited for New York, but in a very blank slate kind of way. Like I'm just excited for it to happen, but I know very specifically what I'm losing in Chicago. So I'm just going to focus on the specifics, and then when I get to New York, I'll figure it out.
Yeah. That sounds beautiful. The idea of being able to commemorate and thank that person, those people, for having made your time in Chicago what it was.
Yeah. Without them, it wouldn't have been the same.
Yeah. It's great. And you're thinking about how a lot of people will be watching this video in different stages of their lives. And maybe some people are contemplating making a move, but not knowing if it's going to be worth it. Do you have any final words of advice or encouragement that you want to share?
Sure. There was an experiment that, do you know the guy that wrote Freakonomics? I think Stephen Dubner.
Yeah.
I think it was him. He ran an experiment where he enlisted a bunch of people who were on the verge of making big life decisions. Things like, should I move? Should I end this relationship and get divorced? Should I, various big decisions that people come across in life. And I think, and if I'm recalling this right, he basically said to half of them, do it. And to the other half, he said, don't do it. It doesn't matter what it is, just do it or don't do it. They didn't need to follow his advice, he just gave that advice. And I think the outcome of this, or the people who he told to do it, were slightly more likely to do it, and they ended up happier. whatever the thing was. So making the change was actually net positive. And I think it just speaks to a status quo bias that we all have of like, we're comfortable here. I'm comfy and warm, and I know what this is. And then there is unknown and scary. So, something is telling me I should try it, but I'm pretty happy here. So my encouragement and advice is to give it a try. Especially if you can come back. Because then what's your worst case? You go there, you learn something about yourself, you don't enjoy it, but that's okay. Life doesn't have to be positive all the time.
Right.
You go there, you try it. If you don't like it, you come back. But if you do, you've learned something about yourself as well, and you've made new friends. I wouldn't have met you if I hadn't been willing to come to Chicago.
Right.
So like there are. Don't be afraid of the unknown. Who knows who you'll meet and what will happen.
Yeah.
And hopefully it'll be a good time. Maybe that's my bias from having done this a few times. But I do think we have a tendency to stay where we are because it's safe.
Yeah.
So if you can do that, if you can go have some change and know that you have a safety net to fall back on, go do it. Go explore. You in 20 years will thank yourself for doing it.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you, Neeloy, for this conversation and your friendship. And I'm really excited for you as you go to New York in a few months and start exploring there.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to hosting both of you.
Yeah.
Oh, so I don't know if you covered this in depth, Sammy, but one thing I was curious about is how did you guys actually meet? And like you have this friendship several years going, but what was that meeting like that first time?
Yeah. So I mentioned Tea with Strangers, and at the time I was in college, and I was actually in contact with a friend who had graduated early. She had moved to San Francisco, and she was going to these meetings, and she told me about Tea with Strangers. So she mentioned, hey, maybe Chicago has something similar. And I was looking to network with other people and just have engage with the broader Chicago community. So anyway, went to Tea with Strangers, thought it was great. And there was a call for having Tea with Stranger hosts. And so I signed up, not really knowing what to expect. And there was a gathering at one of those hosts' houses. In hindsight, I was like this young 20-something, and I was going to some random guy's house that I'd never met. Maybe not the safest thing, but I trusted that this was a community of people that genuinely wanted to make connections. And Neeloy was there because he was a host. I don't know if you want to share, like, how you got involved with Tea with Strangers.
Sure.
What brought you to that night?
Yeah, I heard about Tea with Strangers because it was a San Francisco thing, and I think I was attracted to it because it had the word tea in it, and I was just missing tea or something. Like it really was an unexpected reason. I don't even know what I would have Googled to find it, but I found it in San Francisco. Messaged the host, who was not in San Francisco at the time, so messaged the kind of founder of the organization to say, "Can I be a host?" And he said, "Well, have you been to a tea?" And I said, "No." I said, "Well, you should probably go to some tea times first."
Yeah.
I said, "Fine." So I went to a tea time in San Francisco. Oh, I actually just remembered that. Yeah. Or Palo Alto or somewhere.
Yeah.
Or possibly I went to two. Honestly, my memory is terrible and I can't remember. But so I went to one or two tea times in the Bay Area. Met some interesting people. Didn't really stay in touch with any of them, but I liked the format. And I was aware I was coming to Chicago, and I didn't know anyone in Chicago, so looked for the tea times. There was a tea time in my first week in Chicago that I went to. It was basically the only social thing I did in my first week in Chicago.
Oh wow.
Because I watched the Wimbledon tennis tournament for the rest of it. I hadn't started work yet, so I was just watching tennis and going to tea. Enjoyed it. I was already a host, I think, at that point, but it was just trying to meet people too.
Yeah.
And I don't actually remember this specific event. I remember meeting you, but the event I don't remember. So I guess I found myself at Bar's house.
Yes. So we were at one of the host houses, and everyone was introducing themselves. And when I was originally thinking about it, I'm like, okay, Tea with Strangers, it's an organization where people are volunteering their time to basically they create a profile on this website and they say, okay, I'm going to be at this coffee shop from 3 to 5. Whoever wants to join me, you can sign up or RSVP, right? And I'm thinking, oh, well, the people who do this, I don't know, like they seem like they would be genuine, open, friendly, and they really are, or they were. And when I showed up at this place, I didn't realize that all of them went to Ivy League schools. And maybe it was because the founder had that was their network, right? And so here I was, a college student in my junior year, and I was like, "Oh, hi! I haven't even graduated college yet, but nice to meet everyone." And so it was nice to feel like there was a level playing field. Like it didn't matter where you were coming from; we were all just here to build connections. And somehow Neil and I started talking, and I had driven there because I lived in the suburbs. I was commuting to college at the time. So I offered him a ride home, and in our conversation, that's when he told me, oh, I'm new to Chicago. That's kind of why I wanted to do this. And unfortunately, there was a heartbreak story in there, and because I kind of got to hear about that. And then we've just been friends ever since, and it's been I think since 2014 or 15.
Yeah,
so
2015.
Yeah.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
It's a quarter of your life.
Oh my gosh. Well, my birthday's coming up, so that's kind of hard to think about, that so much of my life, even just, oh my gosh, thinking back to college, entirely different world.
Yeah, it's funny because I never interacted with you in a college sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just knew you as another host. Like I remember going to your graduation in
Mm-hmm.
Loyola and being like, oh yeah, I forgot she's much younger than me. Because you didn't come across that way at the TV Strangers host events. So that was cool.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.